Hey, hello, welcome to Real Life Guitars. First time in a long time on video. Suddenly becomes spring or summer out there, but not quite. I'm Sam. This is Real Life Guitars workshop where I do setups and bits and bobs, including making oak casters and other groovy things. I'll show you, well, maybe I'll show you one of my headless ones that are coming along as well in a minute. But anyway, what we've got here today is Malcolm's newest baby, and it's the first time I've had my hands on one of these. This is a Fret King. I don't know the model number, but it's it's an Eclat. Yes, for those Europeans amongst us, the Eclat. It's a bit like do you remember the Lotus Eclat and the Elan and the Elise? All those names were all easy to say until you came to the Eclat, and then all us British people got tongue-tied at that point. So the Lotus Eclat, the Wilkinson Eclat, this is a Les Paul style thing, but with a very interesting arm cutaway. Kind of none of this bevelly stuff, just a straightforward chop away where your arm goes. So why not? Arm fits in there beautifully, and you can see that it's got a nice thick maple top of some sort on it, and it cuts right away. You can see how deep that is. This guitar is a big beast, and it has a beautiful kind of tortoiseshell binding all the way around it, and it has a nice smooth, very highly polished actually rosewood fingerboard with the tortoiseshell binding. It has brushed nickel coloured pickups and some little standard hats here. And what we've got in terms of the knobs configuration, obviously we've got volume. Obviously we've got volume at the front, and we've got a tone down there. It's a master volume and master tone. And then here we've got what I think is a dual roll-off single round to humbucker. Single humbucker. So it just gets a little bit of a growlier sound, so it's pretty cool. That functionality was also found on the AV, the vintage AV6 that I had, which was the 3 P90 Strat thing in Laguna Blue, and that rolled off from stacked P90s to kind of whatever single coil P90s on a tone knob actually on the Strat configuration. But anyway, so Malcolm's picked this up, and it is an absolute beast in terms of thickness. I don't know how well you can see that, but sorry, there's a bright doorway behind us, but it's a really fat, chunky guitar, and even with this cutaway, there's no other weight relief in it, so it measures up at a chunky 10 pounds just to get going with, so it really is a beast of a guitar. And Malcolm's got it, it has a little bit of damage on the binding down here, and I think what he's done, he's also I don't know what the word is, lightly sanded the lacquer on the back to his normal playing kind of silkiness, so it's not sticky lacquer, but it's pretty good looking. So he's obviously used it, whatever, 2000 grit and taken the shine off that, so it doesn't catch your hand so much. But what a beast! I mean, the pickups are really high output. I can't tell you exactly what they are, but on the standard clean setting on my amp, I've just sucked the knob into the Hoover. Sorry, Henry sucked the knob off this Roland Q. So that's guaranteed me in two weeks time, Henry, I'm going to have to disembowel him to get it back out like I did the last time. It'll teach me to use the Hoover to get rid of all the wood sawdust on top of here. But anyway, this is set on quarter, and it's pretty loud even in this sort of environment, or loud for this setting. So go above a quarter into the half region. So what I noticed straight away about this guitar, there's several things I noticed about it. One of them is it's very clean sounding, so it's biting, but the tone is usable. I don't know if it's logarithmic, progressive, linear. Can't really tell. Better ears than me would know. But anyway, the point point is you've got quite a lot of tone control, so you can tame that bite, but it's there if you want it, and by the time you throw on some rectifier type modelling or whatever, with the gain even half up, you've got a monster sort of bite. Which is good. So nothing. Quite a nice fluty neck pickup sound. Again, even though it's set in humbucker, it's got quite a lot of that almost single coil sort of flutiness to it, which I've found recently. I've found in the rail hammers, which I really like, a pair of which are sitting here in the guitar. But anyway, so I'm not a good demo guitarist, unfortunately. I had a pro musician buy one of my guitars the other day, and not only demoed it here, but also then took it and played it live in a wedding gig in Marrakesh in Morocco, and filmed a bit of it, and fantastic to see someone else demoing my guitars. Unfortunately, I can't really do them justice, so I'm sorry to say, and some people on videos, YouTube, say, why don't you play them more? It's because my kind of playing palette is a bit limited. I enjoy playing, and I play along to things, and I do alright sort of in a band, but I'm not a virtuoso standalone guitarist by any means. I don't try to be either. Anyway, that aside, so what have we got? We've got a Trevor Wilkinson, Fret King, one of his 3 or even possibly 4 brands. I don't know how many he's got going now, but the Fret King is a kind of top end adventure, and like I say, I've heard lots of good things about them, but until today I've never actually had my hands on one. And one of the things that always interested me about them is that I could see a lot of them. Well, there was a time a year ago or so, it seemed, that I was seeing a lot of them for sale on eBay. And it's always interesting when you hear a lot of good stuff about a guitar, and then you see a lot of them for sale, and you're thinking, well, if they're so good, why are people selling them? And there isn't an easy, straightforward answer to that, but it does make you kind of wonder at times. Now let me just move some things here, because I'm all over the place. I'll just stay there. Yeah, it does make you wonder. Are they? Why? What's all this about them being so good? And then how come? Maybe this is undone, so we've got to take care of that. How come they sell? They seem to be selling. Maybe it was just at that time, anyway. But there's no doubt about it. This is a handsome beastie. It's quite blingy, and it's in nice condition. And yeah, it's Malcolm's latest toy. It's got Wilkinson tuners on there. Probably, I'm not even sure if they're 19:1 ratio ones, but they're nice quality. Things I noticed straight away about this guitar is take this as a complete relative novice's assessment. Listen to this guitar, right? Unplugged. I have to tell you, one of the things you're not hearing with this guitar, is the wood resonating. Right? Mostly, you're just hearing the strings, and it's noticeable. When I heard, I should really go and get another Les Paul copy to demonstrate it against, but I don't have one typically. There's one of mine made of oak, but this is really noticeable for me, and the fact that it's not causing the body to resonate. Now, there's a whole kind of mythology about guitars, and I don't know the answer to this. It's just observation, right? There's a whole thing about tone woods and how the wood shapes the tone and blah 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 blah. Anyway, the point is, some people scientifically argue that actually with an electric guitar, your tone is completely generated by the movement of the string through a pickup, and then the quality of the electrics and so on and so on. And what's kind of essential to that is the solidity of this base at the bridge end and the solidity of the anchoring at the nut end, and of course the components in between, insofar as they don't shake about and shed the energy of the strings. Now if you really want the string to sustain for a long time, then the more solid this unit all is in the kind of the thing that holds the 2 points of the string, the more solid it is, the better. And the less it vibrates and gives off noise even, or vibration, or heat, or whatever else energy can be shed as, the better. So the first thing I notice about this guitar is I mean, yeah, you can put your ear to it and you'll hear it and you can feel the vibration, but it's definitely not it's not resonating or vibrating or shaking the wood. It's not using the wood to generate, it's not turning the energy into sound through the wood as much as some Les Paul guitars that I've handled. And that's what struck me yesterday when I heard Malcolm playing it, and we had the volume off for a second, only for a second, but I could hear that sound there very clearly. There's almost no other sound coming out but the sound of the metal strings. So it has I guess you'd call it a metallic noise. And I find that's really interesting because I think it tells me that the solidity of this unit is really good. And it feels it, I have to say. Now the other thing I noticed about this guitar, in playing it and hearing Malcolm play it, is you have a bit of there's a little bit of playing buzz, and it's actually it's not what you maybe immediately think. It's not fret buzz as such, in the sense that it's high frets. What it sounds to me like, or my ears tell me, that it's a very flat neck and there's no relief. And actually, if you first thing I did is check it, and there is practically no relief in this neck. I'd say that was about 1/10 of a millimetre, if that. So it's tiny. And the question is, do you like it that way, or do you want to clean up those notes just slightly? And I think just putting a tiny bit more relief into that neck would tidy up those notes. All I'm doing there, by the way, is lifting the string slightly higher off the deck. So yeah, just a tiny little bit of adjustment there I think would be good. Malcolm said he'd come across a slightly uneven fret at the top here, which he'd just smoothed out himself, which is fine. We'll check that. We'll check it as well. But the thing with this is that it's feeling pretty low down already, and he's got most of these set. There's a slight variance on the D here. And the one thing that I want to obviously do, make sure this nut's right, but one of the things that has me slightly nervous about this is the quality of the join here, or the finish I should say, is pretty high standard. On that side where you can see it's not so good, but on this side it's absolutely beautifully blended into the lacquer that covers the binding, so there'd be no real way of getting this nut off to replace it other than breaking that seal, and it's such a shame to do. So I'm not going to assume that, well, first of all, like I say, just on hearing, that's height at the first fret isn't the issue. Maybe there might be a little bit of binding which we can take care of in terms of width of the nut, or the slots, but actually I think it's the lack of relief in the neck is the first thing that stands out for me. So I don't want to do anything to this. I don't have to, because the only objective is to make it play as well as it can, and if the frets allow it, the action down here is pretty low. If we just do a sort of quick check on this, I mean, I'd say it's in the 1.2 millimetre region. Yeah, there you go. You won't get much lower than this, Malcolm. That's about 1.1. It's absolutely as low as I think it will get. So hang on a minute. Shall I
get any lower than that?
Shall I turn off the camera when you tell me all about talk? No?
I'm going
to visit some people.
to take the boy to the dentist.
Oh, is it his trip?
He broke his tooth.
When?
A few weeks ago. It's the first time he could get it in.
Okay.
So it's on benefits, so don't have to pay.
How cool.
Don't have to pay.
Unlike us.
That's why we never go. Right, it's the end of it.
Okay. I am freezing cold nose. Don't. It's bad for you.
You need a nose warmer, snotty boy. Right.
Sorry about that little interlude. You didn't need to hear my snotty nose. See you in a little bit. Oh, there won't be any more deliveries, so don't worry about deliveries. No, okay, fine. Right, yeah, so that's about all I think needs to be done. And what I'd like to be able to do is, if this does need some adjustment, let's try and adjust it, but I don't think I don't want to take it out, although it isn't, the binding, the lacquer is cracked here anyway, so it's halfway out. But it'd be a shame on this side, the side you look down on, because it's a very nice finish. It's better than most guitars I've seen. So yeah, lovely overall, and like I say, the action at this end is just phenomenally low, so there really isn't that much to improve at that end. Now what I will do is, while we're at it, I'm going to start with my screwdriver bits. I'm going to start with having a small adjustment on the truss rod, just to see what we get. What are we working with? Oh blimey, can't I see? Nope. Sometimes it's almost impossible to tell whether something claims to be a Phillips head or not. I'll say not, but I could be very wrong. The main thing to do is when you're putting well, that's almost undone anyway. When you're putting a screwdriver in, it's just check the amount of movement once the head's sitting in the slot, and if there's loads of movement before you start turning the screw, then you're using the wrong bit, and you're more than likely, or you run the risk of kind of chewing off the hole. And I think it's one of those things that is that it's a set of heads, new set of heads every now and then is a really important thing to invest in. Okay, now that tells me, it looks to me, I'm guessing Malcolm, you may have already done this, but I don't think that's been open, so I suspect Malcolm hasn't done any truss rod adjustment. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking it's a fraction too straight, so it's not that one either. What could it be then? Oh well. I'm thinking it's a fraction too straight, so I'd want to loosen it a tiny bit, if I can find the right one, which isn't that one either. I've got a whole nest of those little vipers sitting there. And or is it that one? What's going on? Have they used something unusual? Let's try this one. The angle's not fantastic to start with, but okay. Right, I'm going to have to go on a little search. Now, it's really unusual that my handheld ones wouldn't fit. No, it's too big for that. Goes away and mutters a bit. Am I missing one in my set there? What's going on? Somebody! Let's try that one. Let's try that one. Maybe that one, and this one, plus that one, and this weird one. I'm just guessing that. Anyway, so what I want to do is, if I get the right one, and not before, I'm going to want to set this just a tiny bit of slacking off. Okay, that's close to it, but I'm not 100% convinced. That does. Okay, and I've done a tiny little adjustment right there. I suppose you'd call it at most probably a 1/12 of a complete circle. There's a word for that in maths, and as you can tell, I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to double check the thingamajig, the relief. Now that's more than it was. It's only a minor adjustment. So what's happening? So I think that's, I mean, this may adjust itself just a fraction more anyway, but I think what I'm hearing straight away is that's improved the, or cleared up most of that slight buzz, which is great. So it's the tiniest adjustment on, I literally though, I'd say that's probably doubled what it was to 0.2 instead of 0.1. But that small amount has improved it. I'm not going to do any more on the relief. I'll leave it at that and let it settle. But what I'm noticing is that the 1mm action at here and about 1.2 here, which is what you'd hope to get out of the best Les Paul necks. What I'm still seeing is we're choking out. We've got something going on up there. Now the point here is that we don't want to raise the action to overcome that, although it wouldn't take an awful lot of raising. I see that there are little marks drawn on here to show where it's moving from and to. Wouldn't take a huge amount of adjustment, and 1mm at the high E side is a very low action by all accounts. But what might be good for Malcolm's playing pleasure is to just take a very, very light fret leveling approach to this, so that we take care of whatever that little choking, tiny lack of clearance up here at that type of height. So I think let's do it. I don't think there's any problem here, other than, like I say, the D. I would say the D is a minuscule fraction off higher than the others, but otherwise it's almost pretty spot on. But we can make sure that they're all, see, they're toning pretty well. I don't get any pinging going on here. It's progressive. Although they do look quite deep. Oh, maybe there, yeah. Okay, so maybe a tiny bit. So we can take care of that as well. But I would say pretty much ready to go with the lightest of fret levelings here, with the action set as it currently is. Tiny adjustment that I'll make first. I've done the action relief to where I want it to be. To be honest, it could even go a little more than that. But what I don't want to do is raise the make the playing action change. So this is very, very close. It all plays. The only downside is just a slight choke out on the bend. Now, having said that, sometimes these can be taken care of by the tiniest of action movements, such that you cure the choking, but you make no noticeable difference to the, or no appreciable difference really to the playing action. And it's I always talk about it being a trade-off. Or a judgment call. Yeah, it's definitely sticking in that high E. But let's say, look, we're looking at this thing. We say, okay, we've got everything's playing well. It's improved with a little bit of relief in the neck. We do need to pay attention to those slots and just make sure they're wide enough. There's a tiny, everything plays. There's no choking notes, no buzzing, but we do have a choke out on a big bend up here. You might say, well, okay, let's go. Let's take this action, if I can. Nothing's under that much tension. It's quite stiff. If we, I can't turn this thumb wheel. Is this nailed into place? No, that's adjusted deliberately with this thing. Right. Let's see if we can get it to move. Because I'm thinking, you know, the real question is, do we take off fret material off all of these fret metal off all of these frets in order to clear the bends on one note or one string on the whole thing. And it's actually, you might not want to do that, which is an interesting little arrangement because I can't see how we adjust this very well. I don't really want to prod it with a screwdriver, but I will very carefully. Yeah, so the question is do we want to take off fret metal? Okay, so I'm making the tiniest little adjustments here, paying attention to that little thing. So yeah, do we want to take off the fret metal, or we're prepared to take the tiniest little raise in action down here just to clear that, because the amount of clearance it needs is minuscule, and actually I think I would rather give a customer a much cheaper, a far less expensive job, retain the majority of the fret metal as necessary, as we can, and take the judgment call that way. There you go. Something moving. There you go. No, still choking there. Okay. So it's around here. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17th fret, something like that. Okay, well, I've given it a tiny adjustment, and that's taken it to all of 1.2 millimeters. So we'll go with the gentle fret level because it's clear there has been a problem in there, and you know, Malcolm's reported it as such. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the strings pressures off, and I'm going to mark up the thingy, the frets. I'm going to put some new sandpaper on my banana tool because I haven't used it for ages. I've been doing all kinds of other things. I'm just moving this stuff off to one side. I'll do. Yeah, we'll put some new 400 grit on the tool. Oh yeah. Oh, that doesn't sound good. That slot. Put some 400 grit on, and we'll go and do the lightest leveling possible, and yep, take care of that little action. And it's the area where people often end up doing what's called what they call fall away, or you know, there's often this area of the Les Paul neck is very often flat because it can't bend. It's especially on a guitar like this. It's held in place by the where it's glued and fixed into the body. So it's a very, very difficult, or it's very hard to expect it to bend in any way. So the adjustments of the we're down to the extent it will go now, nearly. It's very hard to expect it, or unfair to expect it to bend at all, whereas this part here will bend according to Truss Rod Adjustment. What I found about the method I use is that instead of having to do this fall away thing, the curved rod method actually gently cuts away this congested area, but just enough, because the clearances we're talking about are minor. It does it enough to free up, in my experience, to free up the notes that we're talking about, because they are like tiny clearances. So I'm going to just paint up these things, and then we'll reposition the strings, put it up to playing tension, and I'll hang it up for a second while we go and sandpaper the truss rod that we're going to use. And just had a really nice message from a customer of mine in Scotland, Ian, who's bought a number of guitars off me, mostly rallies but not exclusively. And Ian also had a copy of the 5 Steps to Guitar Setup Heaven, and he said he talked in his email about having put it to work in setting up his acoustic and just making it play so well that he's fallen back in love with it. And that's, to me, that's music to my ears in the nicest possible way, because that's what I set out to do in the first place, which was really to do what I did with my Taylor, I suppose, again and again, which is to help people fall back in love with even apparently the least lovable of guitars, which very often they'd fall out of love with because they wouldn't stay in tune or whatever. So Ian, thank you so much for that bit of feedback, because that really makes it all worthwhile, actually. So I've gone back to the position where I was before on the height setting, so we're down again to the 1mm high E setting. Oh, wrong one. Do. Right, let's hang this up out of the way. I trust that my hangers have got enough strength to do it. For any of those dear viewers who happen to be watching this and think it's too long and boring, then please exercise your right as free individuals of the net to hit the back button on your browser and go somewhere else. But please don't waste your time and mine by leaving me a message saying how crap my videos are, because it A, isn't appreciated, and B, is a bit pointless, because this is how it's going to be. Not to insult you or hurt you, I'm not doing it for that. This is how it's going to be, because this is just how it works for what I do, and actually also for the target market that I aim these videos at. And I will say, for the 20 millionth time, if it works for me, then why would I change it because you don't like it? And it's funny, isn't it, in our consumer world we just don't seem to be able to get our heads round the fact that it could just be that it really works for somebody, and that what they chose to do, i.e. me, was done for a reason. So please, I know I'm talking to the converted, because if you're somebody who follows these videos and enjoys dipping in and out of them or whatever you do, I'm not really talking to you. It's not you I'm talking to, is what I mean. But as a general business principle, I have learned in my 54 years that this point of view thing, where you make the mistake, we, not you, just we often make the mistake of thinking about things through our own view frame and assuming that in some abstract or arbitrary way what we know stands true for everything. So the people who sometimes tell me how crap my videos are do so because they learned some stuff that either works for them in what they do, which is cool, or they learned some stuff at art school or media studies or whatever, or professionally, that says, oh, you must do videos this way, or you must never do that when you're making a video, because that would be bad. And it's amazing how a blade can cut steel. Anyway, yeah, that would be bad, so you don't do it. And then they kind of come onto your video and then they tell you what you're doing is bad, because either they learned, or for them, or whatever, which way, it doesn't apply. And that's so great that if that doesn't apply for you in what you do. But actually, I think it's much more to do with a lack of critical awareness that contexts and the way people do things for a certain reason work in ways that you don't understand. And you know, I can be saying goodbye to happy customers 1 second and then finding an email from somebody who knows for sure that everything I've ever done in real life guitars is crap, and they make a big point of telling me that. And the point is, you just go, well, hang on, I've just said goodbye to somebody who's really thrilled, or I've just had an email from somebody who uses the approach I've taken and has got great results out of their guitar. And you just think, you can't go round judging things by your abstract idea that you learn somewhere. So for the millionth time, for those of you who might be in any doubt about it, I set out to make these videos for a reason that contributes towards my business doing things the way I wanted my business to do things. And you have to watch my lips, Mr. Mrs. Critic. It works, okay? The thing I'm doing works. Whether you like it or not, whether you like the look of it or not, it works, and it is achieving the results that I set out for it. Okay, so just hold on to that bit. Forget the thing you're convinced you're right and whatever. That's okay, it's not human, but it works. And from that point onwards, you just have to, I'd like you, if you're a critic, I'd like you to just entertain the possibility that there are reasons why I say it works, and I have evidence for my claim that it works. And since it's my business and I'm setting out to do what I'm doing with it, my evidence that it works is what I listen to, not your opinion about how you think it should work. So there we go. Sorry to keep going on about that, but it's amazing how many times I will still hear that assertion: it's wrong, or it doesn't work, or you shouldn't make videos that are that long, or cool, do you want to watch something else? I don't mind, honestly. But it does work for me. It achieves what I intended for it. End of complex discussion. So there. So what I'm going to do now is, having taken a little bit off all of those frets, I'm going to do the note test. But more importantly, now we expect it still to choke out, because we're choking out somewhere on the G, so we won't be clearing that just yet. Anyway, but yeah, it never fails to amaze me how people, youngsters, maybe don't have so much experience, blindly continue to tell others how wrong they are, whilst ignoring the evidence to the contrary, the evidence that they can't know about, but which clearly informs the person doing the thing that way. And it's a unique kind of arrogance that is really unpleasant, actually. And the reason I go on about it so much is it's not only totally unpleasant, it really does contribute to world unrest. I go as far as saying that, you know. It's that an inability to perceive it from someone else's point of view other than your own. Right, we're still not quite in the G track yet, so I'm hoping that what we'll find now is that the next bit of leveling, when I recalibrate, will start to reduce that choke. That's the aim of this. If it doesn't, then as I say, it's always a judgment call. If I actually can't reduce that choke, then we ultimately have no choice but to raise the action, playing action just a tiny fraction. That's the final kind of, you know, capitulation. But of course, that's what this precision leveling is all about. But yeah, that thing is just really mad. And actually, I would go as far as put it another way. It's one of the things that I kind of learned. Sometimes people ask me how something works and how did real love guitars is, you know, it's going from strength to strength, or you know, it's hitting its stride or whatever. And some people have said to me, you know, what was your plan? How did you get it going? And my plan was exactly this: to put into practice some of the things I'd learned along the way, some basic principles. And one of them is, I put it really simply, if you're running a business and you're watching this, because quite a lot of guitarists are people who have their own businesses. Okay. I'm not quite clear on that, so I'm going to go backwards in a minute, but I'll go across the whole thing first. Yeah, so one of the principles that I've learned and I've put into practice, which is why, in my experience, doing this is so enjoyable. It's not, you know, I haven't set out to make it a multinational business. It's just a lifestyle home business. But the reason it's so enjoyable for me is I learned a while back that a secret of doing okay, enjoying business, is, it sounds really abstract, but it's knowing who your customer is and who they aren't. Right now, I used to teach in graphic design, and I used to apply that principle with my students, and I'd say, well, who's the intended customer for this piece of work that you're doing, or you know, who's the target audience? Because, you know, graphics is always about doing stuff for a client, usually about doing stuff for a client. And I'd say to them, who's your target audience? And they'd, you know, with the sort of usual ill discipline of youth, they'd go, oh, you know, anybody who likes blue, you know. And I'd say, well, okay, be more specific, can you? And they go, well, I can't, it could be anybody. And they go, why should I be more specific? And I'd say to them, because if you know who your customer is, it isn't like some horrible restriction or constraint that students thought it was. So picking an audience or a target customer to them was like a they saw it as a stripping away of creative freedom, and they hated it and they resisted it because they didn't want to be bound by the discipline of aiming something at someone with a specific intention, and then actually the discipline of being disciplined enough to actually ascertain or assess whether it would hit the mark or not. And you can only do that if you've chosen a specific audience and you have an idea of what impact you want this thing to have. And so in that constraint was a great sort of mechanism for finding out whether you're, or for developing your skill, actually, a tool to build your discipline in the skill. And it's the same with business, right? And so they didn't like to choose the audience, and they didn't like to stick to it, because they thought it was a loss of creative freedom. And in fact, it was the opposite. It allowed those who were willing to set kind of a test or a laboratory for their own abilities, and then to work out, not only to work out whether they were hitting the mark, but to be able to actually see where they weren't, and therefore adjust and modify their way of doing things, and aka improve. All right? And unfortunately in modern universities that seems to be a kind of dirty word, and they don't like to put those constraints on, and as a result my experience was that students no longer were improving because we couldn't make them disciplined enough. The system didn't want them to be disciplined, because actually being disciplined runs the risk of failing, and failing meant losing the student and their funding and so on, and so the institutions didn't like it. A quick history of late 20th century education, higher education there. But anyway, so bring it to business perspective. I learned that if you're going to do something in business, know very clearly, precisely, who your customer is and who your customer isn't. And when people say why, because my answer would be, if you know who your customer is, first thing that happens is you know what they like and don't like, or what they want and don't want. And you also, I'm going to go back to the first three frets, you also know how they see themselves, you know what's important to them, you know what they're willing to pay for and what they're not, and you know what the thing is that they like most of all, and therefore you can tailor what you do to give them what they want. And the thing about that, a bit like the students and choosing an audience and having the courage to say, well, here's my audience, now I've chosen that, we can actually at least stand a chance of seeing whether I've hit the mark or not, instead of just making pretty pictures and saying, isn't that cool? Having the courage to specify an audience, as I say, runs the risk of being told you haven't kind of achieved the stated result for that audience. So the students didn't like that, and a lot of people in business don't like that, because to them it means they're shutting out a sort of possible range of people. Surely we want to sell to everyone. And one of the things I learned in business is that if you are somebody who wants to sell to everyone, you are condemning yourself to basically the price war territory. You can only ultimately, if you're aiming for everybody, you can basically only differentiate on price, and that is a hiding to hell. And if you're in a business right now, your own business, and your primary sort of day-to-day concern is, how do I reduce my costs in order to compete or charge less so that I can beat this other competitor on price, I guarantee you your life is a misery in business, and there's no getting around it. It's just, you are going to be, if your life isn't a misery, then somebody else's who works for your life is a misery. Your employees or your affiliates or your franchise partners or whatever it is. It's all about price. You're in a hiding to nothing, because ultimately you'll be driven down in price to a point where you might as well, your only natural way of improving it is to sack everyone and get robots or something like that. So the only way to not do that is to specify a market, know exactly who it is, and charge, if you're smart, I would say, charge a premium price for a known market whose needs you can meet in a premium way. And that way, if you can do that, you have the joy of knowing who your market is. You don't have any conversations. I mean, I'll finish my sentence. You don't have conversations with people who aren't your market, right? Now that rolls off the tongue easily. I can't tell you how nice it is to be able to say to somebody straight out, look, I'm not the supplier for you, or I'm not the person, you don't need me for this. You need such and such guitars or whatever, or cut price guitars or budget guitars, whatever. And it's absolutely liberating to do that. And you can do it in a way that the customer says to you, oh, okay, brilliant, yeah, no, I get it, I see what you're offering. And who knows, one day when they actually want that thing you're offering, they'll come back to you. But yeah, so that's the idea, is to know who your market is and who it definitely isn't. Oh, what am I on? We're on just a fraction less than 1 millimeter, which means I've gone a tiny tad too far. But I think, just looking at how this is working, at such a low action, I don't really want to be taking any more fret material off to try and free up those bends. I think what I'm going to do is make a tiny action adjustment after this. There will be a little bit more reduction when it comes to sanding off and smoothing off, but everything's level. But we're getting the notes. Actually, I'll do a tiny bit more because we are almost there. Let's just have courage in our convictions. Anyway, yeah. So the thing about, as I said, knowing your market is a liberating thing. It allows you to specify what you're doing, so you don't waste time trying to do everything. It also means it's the only way of avoiding just being in an all-out price war with everybody else for every other customer in the world, and it allows you the joy of being specific and knowing what your target audience, target market wants, and being able to tailor what you do more and more for them. And you're not listening to what everyone wants, you're listening to what a specific group of people want. Of course, within that, you're also limiting who you might sell to, which is again a discipline. You have to hold firm to that, saying, no, I don't do everything, I just do this, and I'm going to stick to that. I'm not going to suddenly branch out when times get difficult. I'm going to double my efforts, redouble my efforts on the market I do believe that I'm good to service. And so that's the beauty of doing it, and this is the one thing that I've learned, or one of the things I learned about marketing the hard way, from never having actually done it in the first few times I've tried things. But having done it with Re Love Guitars, I'm very clear about who is and isn't my market, and as a result, coming right back to the initial conversation rant I was having, is that often the people who critique what I'm doing on YouTube or something like that, apart from being bad-tempered, often what they do is they're critiquing from the assumption that I'm trying to sell, I'm trying to get popular on YouTube to sell my guitars or sell my setup services to everybody. And so yeah, we're clear. Yeah, we're there. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let the sanding take the last micro fraction of it out. So yeah, you know, often that criticism comes from that just slight lack of understanding about this thing of knowing your target market. And I guess that's the missing bit. And if these people understood that I know very well who my target market is, and I know that what I'm doing works for them, then they would understand immediately why I don't take their criticism on board, because it's not relevant. Not I don't respect it, or you know, that there isn't sometimes something useful to know that I can't see, but I will, to be fair, I tend to take feedback seriously from people who demonstrate that, or show that they know they understand that I know who my target market is. Because at that point, it's clear that they know what I'm trying to do, and therefore the criticism becomes relevant. And it's exactly the same when I was a student. If I knew what they were trying to do, if they were courageous enough to pick a specific audience and tell me what they were trying to achieve with that audience, what they then did was it was them having the courage to give me the tools to evaluate whether they had achieved what they were trying to achieve, and to give them meaningful feedback. And without knowing what they're trying to do, they can't give me I couldn't give them meaningful feedback. And it's exactly the same with this business thing. So that's the point. And if you are somebody with a brain and you are listening, or you do think these things through, and you're also still tempted to critique people, maybe, think about it from that point of view. If you want to genuinely give feedback, you'll give more useful feedback if you understand what it is I do or somebody does, and demonstrate you understand how they're working. Then your feedback will be relevant. But just a sort of an abstract, I don't like the length of your videos, mate, you don't appeal to me. Well, my answer continually on YouTube is I'm not appealing to you. But go away and don't bother making comments, because it's not good use of your time or mine. Anyway, so I hope that was not too much of a boring rant, but there you go. It is something. I am one of these days. I'm going to write a book on it. I think. We are. Nice one, Malcolm. He's got it down to barely the 0.3 millimeter over the first fret. I suspect the other ones are even lower. 0.25. We have to go with what we've got. I don't want to bash off this nut for any reason other than an absolute necessity, because of the loveliness of that joint. But what I do care about is the width of these slots. So I'm going to use this as a way of just making sure these slots are, if I can, as the right width, so they don't have a risk of sticking. Now, I recognise that in doing that I'm skating close to the kind of minimum of what is it, 2.2 here. I think, yeah, see Malcolm's cut them lower than that. I did say the D was higher, and the D is at 2. The A is lower, and I can't really rescue that at the moment. So I'm not bothered about the heights. They're not the most important thing. They're all absolutely low enough. They're all low enough to not cause any intonation problems at all. What I'm concerned about is the free movement, and actually on the lower ones, they're barely 0.2, but they're all running smoothly. It's the top one here that's the tricky one, so whatever the height of it, we're going to have to adjust the width of that. So let's just see what we've got. It's the only one causing problems. See, it's already, the G is already sub 0.2. Okay, the B, we've got a tiny bit of room. Yeah, so I was, yeah, one of these days I'm gonna write a book of some kind on this thing of choosing, knowing the balance of what appears to be the risk of specifying a target market and having the courage to go after it, versus the temptation, which is to try and serve everybody. I mean, when you think of somebody who sells toilet paper, right, you know that they are essentially, they're playing for everybody market, right? I mean, they may say that they've got specific customers in mind, but it'll be toilet paper for everybody. They may have some kind of segmentation that they'll tell you about, but you also know, when you think of yourself getting involved in being a purveyor of toilet paper, I don't know, you're kind of, your optimism probably kind of flags as soon as you think about it, and chances are you kind of get demoralised thinking about running a business selling beans or toilet paper. And I suspect that if that's true, the reason why is because at the core, you know, it's a price game. That's all it is. It's nothing more than a price, you know, a price war deal. And how can that be exciting? What can you do? Now, for some people, that is an interesting business proposition. For people who like systems and processes, how do you make the world's, you know, how do you make efficiency improvements and thereby produce the world's cheapest beans or cheapest toilet roll and make yourself a profit enough to buy your catamaran? It could be part of your expertise and what thrills you about business, and that's, you know, that is, some people like business from that perspective. That's what they're in business for, you know, the process of business, and for them, being in a price war represents the whoop, tiny bit left. Being in a price war is exciting, you know. But for a small business person, I can't think of anything more dreary than kind of dropping your guitar setup price to try and undercut the kiddie down the road who's maybe a student or whatever and lives at home and doesn't need to pay the rent and therefore can charge £20 for a so-called service, and you suddenly can't charge your 75 quid or whatever you charge, you know. Right, that's solved the E problem. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to do the whole sanding, polishing out thing, because I don't think the height of the first fret action was or is the significant problem here. Again, it's that trade-off thing, a judgment call. Set that against the destruction, if you like, of taking off the nut off this lovely join that's already there, and I think it would spoil it if it's not 100% necessary, which it currently isn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off these strings now, and we're going to put them away as a set of sacrificial strings for another time. I'm going to now proceed with the fret crowning process, and after that we'll go into the polishing out and getting it all cleaned up and ready to go out. But I think that's basically going to be come on. This is really the main thing I was aiming to do, which is to free up those choke notes at that very, very low action. But like I said, this guitar was set incredibly low, so it's a challenging level setting to begin with. So if we can make it play at this action, then good on us. This bridge doesn't really want to come out. So okay, what I'm going to do, so I'll leave the strings dangling for a minute, because I'm going to spend some boring time straightening the ends out, but just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm just going to do the next obvious bit, which is to remark up these frets so I can crown them with a file. And the crowning just reshapes them so that any flat spots that we've created, or in fact we have created flat spots by leveling them, it's sort of par for the course. Then the reprofiling or crowning is a way of reshaping the frets into the correct horseshoe shaped thing. Now I'm missing my crowning file, which is not so fantastic. Now I know Mark had it when he was here last, but where he put it could be an interesting challenge. Marky, where have you put the crowning file? Oh Nick, here it is. Kind of where he used it, so that's good. Yeah, right. So let's have a look. Well, these are medium jumbo, so let's go with the medium end, and we'll just take off the shoulders of the frets, and it tells us, we can see as we use it, we can see the aim is to reduce the amount of marker pen down to a thin line, as thin as possible, running down the centre. And the reason we're aiming for a thin line is because that tells us we've reshaped the fret edges, or the shoulders, without taking any height off the top, because it's kind of implicit that we can't have taken any material off the top if we've left the marker pen untouched. So occasionally it's going to hit it and we can't avoid it, but more or less as soon as we clean that marker pen off the top, we stop filing, because we're in danger of taking the actual height of the fret lower, which we don't want to do. So depending on the amount of flattening or levelling that we did, dictates how long we spend in this process. And actually for most of these frets we're now on a pretty quick skip over, so this shouldn't take long at all. So like I said, all the way along it's a judgment call, you know, and the aim is what's most important, and it changes depending on what you find as you go along. What's most important can change. So you may start off with an intention of doing something, and then you discover there's a problem, and that necessitates something else happening to make sure this works, or it stays working. or it doesn't get any worse, and that can change the priority. So, you know, when you're doing this, you need to be willing to readjust depending on what you discover, and you just need the flexibility to remember that nothing is set in stone, and that's why I keep saying it's a judgment call along the way, and it's that responsive flexibility that's really important. So, for example, constantly on this job, just re-looking at the quality of this fixing here, that would be such a shame to break it off. It would make such a big gap, by the way, to chip that off, and who knows if it probably wouldn't even come off square. I probably couldn't cut that square, so it would cause such a damage that I would much rather, on this guitar, possibly even repair these slots if they were really too low, rather than bash this nut off. And it's not often I would say that, because not many guitars quite simply have as good a nut, a good lacquer finishing over the nut there. So it's just whatever you're faced with. Okay, so that's that bit done. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to untangle these strings, or straighten them out a little bit with a pair of pliers so I can reuse them. And what I'm then going to do is bind up masking tape, so mask up the fretboard, fingerboard, so this guitar is protected for when I come back and do the sanding part to polish out these frets into a nice playing condition. And once we've done that, we're pretty much good to go. Alright, so I'll see you in a bit. Good morning, quick recap here with Malcolm's Trevor Wilkinson guitar, Fret King Eclat. So having set it up, what I've done is I've given it a little bit more relief in the neck, so we're getting less of the slight fret buzz than we had before, but also I've fret leveled it as well to cure problems at this end, so we've got full bends that we didn't have before, which is putting it still out of tune. So a bit of stretching still to do. Yeah. Very much. Ooh. And I've got one slot here which is pinging, so it needs just a bit of widening. It's a ridiculously low action, 1mm, about 1.1 here and 1 here, but it plays as expected, and with high output pickups, it's got a nutty sort of overdriven. Really vamping it up. And yeah, so it's quite something. It's quite a beast. There's a little bit of damage on the neck here, which I'm going to touch up actually indoors, but I'll do it off camera, just so it doesn't stand out a mile. There's that, and there was a tiny little bit of damage done to getting this thing that was, I don't know, somehow it was stuck. It was locked on or cross-threaded onto here, but it was loose. So Unfortunately, I made a small scratch there which I had to touch up with lacquer as well. It's not 100% perfect, but otherwise it would have eventually just carried on moving around. But absolute, not I wouldn't say shredder exactly, but it's a real glam guitar. This, you want to be playing that kind of rectified tone all day long, and so on. Anyway, there you go. I just wanted to show you this finished and done. Like I say, the fret leveling allowed us to get those, free up those final bent notes up here, which when you're dealing with such tiny clearances, it's only it really is, I suppose it's a way of putting it, it's like a law of diminishing returns. You get to a certain level where it becomes increasingly difficult to, if you're getting choked on a bend, you have to really work quite hard to free up that bent note on a radius of whatever this is probably 12, but to free up that note, the simplest way is to raise the action. But if you insist, as I often do, on keeping the action where it is, if that's your target, then you have to work quite hard to get a tiny improvement out of it in terms of the bend. But we've got it here, so you have to be quite disciplined with holding the note down. It's just on the edge of those notes, but a tiny adjustment tweak, if you really wanted to completely free that up, would work. But I think one of the things that I was keen to do was to preserve this join here, because I don't know how well it can ever show up on here. It's a very, very handsome lacquered, fully kind of lacquered joint, and to sort of chisel that off would be a bit of a shame. So happy to say that I've got the nut down to that, apart from just needing to widen the D slot just a smidgen, so I'll do that. Anyway, I just wanted to finish off with this. It's a new day, and I've got other things to show you and get on with, including that, one of which is that white thing down there. But before I do that, I will take care of the D slot on here before I put this baby back into its bag. So I'll just tweak that. There you are, you can just hear it there. Absolutely minor little pating. And I know that when I saw Malcolm on Sunday and he handed this one over to me, he was just telling me about a couple of the strings were actually stuck, literally kind of, he couldn't even pull them out of the nut when he got the guitar, so they really were choked, not choked, wedged in the slots. So there we go, it's freed up. So that's going to go in the bag for now until I go in the house, and I will set up with some sort of prop indoors, and maybe later this evening just build up some lacquer on that damage and then flatten it back tomorrow probably. In the meantime, that's done. And now stand up properly. Thank you. I'll see you again on the next guitar.